That is very, very important if you want to have effective policy design and implementation and monitoring. The second one is equity and inclusivity. So on this one, you have to ensure that policies and in those programs actually address the needs and priorities of the stakeholders. Of all the stakeholders that are involved, the key stakeholders. And always remember this, particularly the vulnerable and the marginalized. So the third one is context specificity. And this one, like I gave an example of Zimbabwe yesterday, that when you look at various areas, you will see that the context can actually change depending on several other aspects, culture, etc. So you have to design, you can't just copy and paste what is happening or applicable to DRC might not be applicable to Nigeria, something like that. So you really have to be content specific with context specific with the way that you are dealing with the formulations. You also have to be gender sensitive. You have to recognize and address the different roles, needs, and priorities for men and those ones for women in agriculture. That is very, very important to take note of. Socially inclusive. You have to be socially inclusive in the way that you are actually doing the work by considering the needs of and priorities of diverse social groups. People are different and they belong to social background, different social backgrounds. In those ones, if not taken into consideration, can actually result in some hiccups in your policy formulation. So when you are talking actually about the diverse in social groups, you should also include the youth, the elderly, they have different interests, and the people with disabilities. Don't leave them behind. We have to work together as one family. When you look at a farmer-centered, which means you have to be farmer-centered. For us in agriculture, what we want is to try and help the farmers develop. We want to help the farmers to produce with minimal pain in the way that they do things. So when they are designing policies that affect their agricultural food base, you include them, but also listen to the problems that they face. You have to listen to their voice, and then you have to craft the policy that should enhance their productivity and also support their emotions. Right. The other point is that you have to think in terms of climate, what I call a climate justice here. So in this case, you need to address the disproportionate impacts of climate change on vulnerability populations, on vulnerable populations. And you have to ensure that policies and programs promote climate justice. This is actually one of the areas that when I showed you the graph, that diagram yesterday, you saw when you want to have a good productivity, you have also to take into account the resilience of your production system, and you also have to take into account the effects of whatever practices and actions that we are taking to the environment. So it is really very important to consider climate justice. You shouldn't assume that people know everything, stakeholders know everything. Capacity building is very, very important. Always think of it if you are looking as a team on a certain a characteristic, or you are missing someone who has a specialty on something that is important, that is required in coming up with your policy, then capacity building is something that has to be considered always. You have to build the capacity of stakeholders, including farmers, the extension agents that you have been working with, and the local government officials to implement and adapt your climate smart agriculture policies and programs. That is very, 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 very important. Then you look at the monitoring and evaluation, which is also what you do when you are doing things. You always have to go back and forth to check whether you are still relevant, if you are still relevant in what you are doing, and you are also still addressing the same issue that you agreed that you want to address. There is a flexibility and adaptability, which is something that is very important when you are designing policies and programs that are flexible and adaptable to changing the climate environment. Then you really have to listen to the stakeholders who are there and then discuss things. If you have your own way of thinking, sometimes some people or some stakeholders may have another route that they want to take. You don't just have to pull towards your own way of thinking. People have to agree, people have to discuss, and people have to be flexible and tolerant. Then Alice talked about something like evidence-based decision making. This is important. The ground policy and program design in evidence-based research and analysis, considering local knowledge and scientific expertise, is very, very key. A kind of a principle that you should be taking into place in consideration. So I think if you incorporate these principles, climate smart agriculture policies and programs can be more effective, and they can be sustainable, equitable, and ultimately contribute to climate resilience and food security. So it is very, very important actually to look at the principles. So I just gave you a cafeteria of the principles. It doesn't mean that they are exhaustive. And it also doesn't mean that when you are designing your own policies, then you have to consider all of them, because some may fall off, some should be considered, but it will be very, very important for you to be aware of these principles. So I move on to some of the examples. You want to design the program design. No, now you want to design the program. You will know all those principles that you've been discussing. An example is designing a CSA policy for small scale farmers in Zambia. So when you are conducting your training with your students, then you have to give them some of the examples like what I have done here. I have two references. The first reference is on scaling up climate smart agriculture solutions for smallholder cereals and livestock farmers in Zambia. Then the second one is on multi-stakeholder dialogue space together scaling climate smart agriculture and climate information services in Zambia. So when you get some of these examples, that is where you can actually generate the discussion points with your students. You give them some material, they go and read, and then they come back, they discuss in a group. You can even ask them to make a presentation on how they found it useful from the text. When you have multi-stakeholder dialogue, what is involved? When you want to start, say, to scale up some climate smart agricultural solutions, what is expected? what are the shortfalls that they would have identified in the references that you would have given them. So this is very, very important because, that is where you start generating a discussion, the dialogue. It starts actually during the learning process. Because if you just teach and then people are not involved, then it becomes a problem now to say go and work with people where you are going to dialogue with them, yet the learning process did not involve that. So it is really very important to give some of these examples. I move on to participatory monitoring and evaluation approaches. When you look at the concepts, the principles here, there's somewhere where I talked about the participatory monitoring and evaluation. But it is very, very important actually to look at various stages where this participatory monitoring and evaluation is taking place. It can be, as you can see from number one, farmer-led monitoring, where farmers collect and analyze data on climate smart agricultural practices, yields, and climate impacts. So you give that responsibility at farm level, where some individual farmers are actually taking the recordings. That is where you also see that climate information services plays a part whereby you want to provide data about what is happening in the environment, what is coming next week. Are there going to be rains, or should the farmers start harvesting now, or should the farmers leave it until maybe after a week because you expect that it will be raining heavily? Something like that. So you have this farmer-led monitoring to consider, but sometimes some of the projects, depending on their trust, may require the monitoring at community level. So you have what is called the community-based monitoring, where communities monitor and evaluate the CSA projects, providing feedback to the project implementers. So in this case, you actually see that there are various ways in which you can do the monitoring. There is the third one there, which is participatory rural appraisals. And this one involves a diverse group of stakeholders whereby you are discussing things. So it's a range of methods that can be used, e.g. mapping, diagramming, focus groups, and this is being done to gather information and engage communities in M&E, that is in monitoring and evaluation. You can also use another method which they call citizen science, where local communities collect data on climate, agriculture, and environmental indicators for discussion purposes and also for advice purposes. Then you can also look at what we call the farmer field schools. That is where farmers learn and share the knowledge on CSA practices, monitoring, and evaluation. There's something that I want to discuss with you. When you think of farmer field schools, in agriculture, let me say agricultural development or the evolution in agricultural development, you will see that from the time where people used to practice shifting cultivation, things have been changing. Oh, someone is also talking in the background. Please remember to mute. Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, Prof, we can continue.
Okay. So I was saying that if sorry, from shifting cultivation, we moved through various processes in agricultural development. We moved on to the Green Revolution around the 1940s, for example. And then from there, people discovered that there are some undesirable effects of the Green Revolution. And then they started trying to adjust. And then what we call adaptation to the problems. It's not only adaptation, but also adjusting. So by adjusting, several other ways of looking at agriculture and agricultural practice emerged. And one of these ways is the farmer field schools. You know, if you can still remember, and in some areas it is still happening, where you have some research institutions, they carry out the research, and once they carry out the research, they get the results, they take the results to the farmer, and then they say, the farmer, you have to implement this to see if it works. The farmer can adopt or not adopt. Then there was another undesirable problem with that the farmers were not adopting, and then in fact there was a problem with adoption by the farmers. You introduce something and then you come back 5 years later, the activity is no longer happening, or it is being carried out by very few people. So in that case, you know, there was somebody who asked a question on adoption yesterday. That why is it so low? So those are some of the things when you design your own things and then you take to the field, then you ask people to do, they will just say, this which was introduced by those people or by that person, we don't see it really working. Let us abandon it. We'll see when they come back. Something like that. So this is what happened. And then later, after that, they thought, let us now work with the farmers. When you go and do your work in the farmers' fields, it is important in the sense that the farmers can actually see how you are doing it, and then you are participating in the processes, and they can adopt. But again, it did not improve much. So we have these farmer field schools where now we have to work together with the farmers, and then working together, doing things, trying to understand together, moving together as a team with them, assessing, and then coming back, monitoring and evaluation to try and enhance the processes that have been established. After that, yeah, it was like, well, how can we improve this? Because still we are not happy with the way people are adopting these new programs that are coming up. So they came up with another way, which is they came up with another system, which is not in this case, participatory rural appraisals. So when they talked about participatory rural appraisals, the idea was to make sure that people from various facets, all stakeholders are involved. It is not only the farmer and the scientist, but it also involves other stakeholders. So that is really something that became the birth of participatory rural appraisal. Right, sorry. So from participatory rural appraisals, then we had now what we call working together in the fields, together with the farmers, and then trying to see how things are happening and what negative effects are being generated together, understanding the science with the farmers. So when you understand the science with the farmers, that is what is come up as a way of then trying to to improve on the participatory. So when you talk about participatory monitoring and evaluation, it means you would have started together from the planning and then targeting and then the evaluation process. Then you give each other responsibilities on who is going to be doing what. So this is how the agricultural sector has evolved. Let me move on to the next slide here. Okay. Sorry, my computer is misbehaving. Okay. Yeah. So I have some examples. When you are conducting your lecture with your students, you introduce some concepts and then you give them some examples. You can also give them some case studies that they can look at and then work to discuss later. We are going to be looking at participatory M&E system for CSA policy in Kenya, for example. When you look at Kenya, the Kenya Agricultural Productivity and Resilience Project that they call the CAP, this one was implemented as a participatory M&E system to track the effectiveness of the CSA policies and programs. So the general discussion that you see in this paper is one that farmer-led monitoring played a key role. On farmer-led monitoring, we have the smallholder farmers who were trained to collect data on crop yields, climate resilient practices and adaptation. Then also you see these community scoreboards whereby local communities assess the project's performance in identifying strengths and areas for improvement. You also see multi-stakeholder platforms at play where farmers, policymakers, and extension agents collaborated on to share experience and discuss challenges and inform the policy decisions. So this participatory approach ensured that farmers' voices were heard and their needs were addressed. So you can imagine, this is just a summary. When you give such a model to your group and then they discuss, so they will start now understanding where some of these principles are being applied, how they are being applied, etc., and then what will be the result. Let me just try to, I don't know where these lines are coming from. Let me stop sharing and then reshare and see what happens. Yeah, it's this one. So yeah, okay. I think it now looks okay. Right, so I just gave an example of Kenya. Then I have a second example. Yeah, so we have participatory M&E system for climate smart agriculture policy in Rwanda. This is the second example. So in Rwanda, we have the Rwanda's Ministry of Agriculture and Animal Resources, which implemented a participatory M&E system for its CSA policy. And that one was focusing on farmer feedback mechanisms. So you will see that here they had some regular surveys and focus group discussions, which gathered farmers' perceptions on policy effectiveness and challenges. You see, when you look again at this policy, you see that they had what we call the local data collection, where community-based data collectors gathered information on policy resilient practices, crop yields, and soil health. Like what I was saying, when we discuss those principles, you can see actually some of them coming in real life situations. You also have participatory review and planning in this context, where annual review workshops brought together farmers, policymakers, and extension agents to assess progress, identify gaps, and plan future intentions. So this participatory M&E system enabled for policymakers to make informed decisions, adjust policies, and improve a CSA program effectiveness. So as you can see, one of us yesterday was worried about how do we make these things effective. You can see now with the examples, the more examples that you give when you are actually conducting the training, it can actually help your participants to actually understand the processes that are taking place. Right. So let us look at the case studies. Like I said yesterday, I said today we are going to be looking at some case studies of the real world examples on inclusive climate smart agricultural policy or policy programs. So on that slide, you will see the real world examples of inclusive climate smart policy or program in Africa. I'm going to be looking at three of those programs that I'm going to share with you. The first one is on adaptation of African agriculture, which is called, which they call the AAA, the AAA initiative in Mali. So I will pick again on an example from Senegal, which they call Agricultural Growth Program, the PASA, right? And then I'll also look at home here in Zimbabwe. We have what they call the Climate Smart Agriculture Investment Plan, the CSAIP. So I will look at those three and then explain what is involved and what they entail. Because the more you see the policies that we are trying to develop at play, and that actually some of these initiatives are being funded by World Bank, it emphasizes the importance really of taking policy formulation seriously. We have here on the left side, as you can see, there's that document by NEPAD, best practice for inclusive country-led program design. It is also something that is really worth reading on your own to try and understand some of these inclusivity issues. So now I move over to the case studies. The first one, like I said, is adaptation of African agriculture. That is the AAA initiative in Mali. The AAA initiative program is funded by the African Bank, the African Development Bank, and the government of Mali, and it aims to enhance climate resilience and improve agricultural productivity among smallholder farmers, particularly women and vulnerable groups. I think it is now making sense what we have talked about, what Alice talked about in the introduction, the importance of taking key stakeholders and without leaving the vulnerable, the women and the farmers. Also, when so let me just turn this phone. So sometimes technology can be very stubborn. I was trying to put off this phone, to turn it off, and it was refusing. After all, I'm the one who bought it, and now it is refusing the owner's demands because maybe the process was not participatory. Okay, just a light moment. Right, so when we were talking about some of the principles that are involved in this Mali program, when you want to check on the inclusive features of this program, you will see that in summary, there is farmer participation, where smallholder farmers, including women and youths, were actively involved in the program design, implementation, and monitoring, which means from the beginning, they were involved, they were taken through the process until to the end, and then in the monitoring process. That, if it is taken into consideration, it will make your policy effective throughout the implementation process. And when you look at this program again, you will see that there are climate resilient practices within it. The program promoted climate resilient agricultural practices such as conservation agriculture, agroforestry, and climate smart crop and animal varieties. There's something that maybe is key to highlight why it is important to involve these people. When you talk about agroforestry, for example, you may think as a scientist that if I go to a certain village and then just maybe bring some multi-purpose trees and then ask them to plant, they will do so because agroforestry can actually improve the soil quality. You lecture them about that, and agroforestry can also provide animal feed, and agroforestry can also provide the households with fuel. But it is not always the case. In certain circumstances, when you get to the field and then start discussing with the people, that is when you start hearing some other issues that you may never have thought of. For example, ownership of the field. In whose field are you going to be planting these trees? Because when you get to this field, I mean to the system, you then see that in a village or in a household, field A is said to belong to so and so, who is not around, and field B belongs to so and so, and the person who is involved in your discussion maybe has only 1 acre. And in that 1 acre, you can't plant many trees there because otherwise there wouldn't be space for him or for her to grow the grain that he may be wanting to do. So you see, it is really very, very important to be inclusive when you are developing some policies. In this same case study, you will see the importance of capacity building, the evidence of capacity building. Training and capacity building activities were provided to farmers, extension agents, and local government officials on the climate smart agricultural practices, as well as climate information services and the adaptation strategies. You will see how it was done. So, it is very, very important that when you are designing these policy frameworks and policy programs, you really have to consider some of those principles that we talked about when I started today's lecture. Uh, let me not call it a lecture. In the end, it's going to be a discussion. Right. So, because normally I don't want to use these words like lecturing and so on, which is like you know a lot and then you are the one who is giving people. No, that is not what it is like. But here, when you are actually conducting this training, you should allow for the interaction. It should be interactive between you. It is only that here we are just giving a summary of what this training is about. And then, of course, in some detail, some key points that we are supposed to keep into consideration when we are actually carrying out the training. Because after this training, we are sure that you are going to be equipped with all the knowledge and expertise for you to also go and train a group of people. Right. So on the adaptation of African agriculture, you see also the importance of gender sensitive approach. The program incorporated a gender sensitive approach that is recognizing the different roles and needs of men and women in agriculture. So you see that in this program, if you really go through it and then try to understand it, you can actually learn a lot. When you get back to your places and then you want to formulate some policies, it will really help to guide because you learn from others so that you don't repeat the same mistakes that they experience during the launching of their own programs. That is how we improve our systems. So I go to the next case study. Right. That is the agricultural growth program supported by the World Bank. That is the impact they call it the PASA program. This one is a program that is happening in Senegal. The idea is actually to look at the crop yields. So they want to target increase the crop yields. They want to look at enhance the climate resilience. In that program, some aspects of improved livelihoods, right? So after implementation, during the implementation processes, then you see that there was improved agricultural practices and climate resilient crop varieties that led to increased crop yields and improved food security. So the climate resilient crop variety makes this one a climate smart kind of an agricultural practice. To enhance, so for them to enhance climate resilience, you see farmers adopted climate resilient practices. For example, reducing their vulnerability to climate-related shocks and stresses. And the program has also improved the livelihoods of smallholder farmers. Because when you have the climate resilient crop varieties, it means you have improved your chances of harvesting something. And if you can harvest something, then it means your vulnerability index also reduces. So when you look at the inclusive features of PASA program, we have number one, the farmer participation. You see it evident in this program. where smallholder farmers, including women and youths, are actively involved in the program design, implementation, and monitoring, just as you saw with the Mali program. Then on the climate resilient practices, the program promotes climate resilient agricultural practices such as conservation agriculture, agroforestry, climate smart crop, and animal varieties. Again, you can see some similarities of what is happening in Mali, but there are some slight differences here and there. Then you can see actually that the context is coming into consideration. Capacity building. Training and capacity building activities are provided by farmers, extension agents, and local government officials on CSA practices, climate information services, and adaptation strategies. Then the last one is on gender-sensitive approach, where the program incorporates a gender-sensitive approach, recognizing the different roles and needs of men and women in agriculture. So you can see those principles that we discussed, they are being used in different ways, but they, of course, you will see that in certain circumstances, some principles have more power than the others. Now, it is now because of the differences that exist in the context of the different systems. We look at the Zimbabwe Climate Smart Agriculture Investment Plan that is also being supported by World Bank. Because you know that World Bank is trying to help the world into developing some systems that can reduce hunger, develop some systems that can reduce harm to the environment. So when you come up with programs that that line of addressing problems that we have, then they can support you. So on this program, you will see that the aim is to improve the productivity, resilience, and low emissions agricultural sector in Zimbabwe. And its key features, when you look at it, is productivity, resilience, and low emissions. If you can reflect on I think it was the figure which I showed you with those circles at the start, you can remember that productivity is at the center, but if you can consider productivity alone, then you can have some undesirable effects in the form of emissions, which can cause damage to the environment. But then that damage to the environment can actually result in the loss of resilience of your systems. And that loss of resilience is actually coming due to changes in the environment, in the climate, which we call climate change. So for you to be able to deal with these climate change issues, then you have to play some climate adaptation programs that you have to put in place, which means you are digging the you are digging deeper into your box of resilience so that you make your systems even more resilient. So the activities that you are carrying out can actually improve the resilience of your system. And those activities should actually contribute to low emissions. This is the Zimbabwean system. When you go into detail with it, then it would help you now to understand those principles which we started with today. So the Zimbabwe CSAIP demonstrates a commitment to inclusive and climate resilient agricultural development, which aligns it with the country's Vision 2030 nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. Some potential CSA interventions that are involved in this program actually include climate resilient crop varieties. I see at DR and SS, which they call the Department of Research and Specialist Services. is actually involved in developing some of these drought-tolerant varieties. So this will promote the use, promotion of the use of these climate drought-tolerant varieties can actually improve the resilience of your crop varieties. Also, agroforestry is being promoted in this program. That is encouraging agroforestry practices to enhance soil health and biodiversity. Because biodiversity loss is one of the areas that is actually affecting our resilience to climate change. We are going to be left with few opportunities to choose from. When you lose biodiversity, you are losing your life. Because if you are only left with two options, where in the beginning you had 10 options to survive drought, it means you have made yourself very vulnerable. Because if those two options are wiped out, then you are gone. So that is the idea here. Also, climate information services. This program is going to be providing farmers with climate information and advisory services to inform in the decision-making process. So you can see from these three world examples that really the issues that we are discussing in this climate module, in this policy module, are the real world issues. And this module is very, very important. And we hope that the discussion points that we have made are going to help you into formulating useful policies which are going to be effective in your own systems. So I can say at the moment we can take a short break before I move into the section 3 of this module, which is called the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Review of CSA and CIS relevant policies. No, we are going to be looking at the monitoring and evaluation framework. That is actually what we are now going to be looking at.
Okay, Prof, thank you very much for the presentation. I would suggest you allow some comments and maybe questions.
Yes.
And discussions, and participants are free to write on the chat as well. If you have any specific comments you want. You can also just raise your hand and ask a question. Yes, there's a hand up. This is Salamato. Please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon.
Yes,
everybody.
Good afternoon.
Okay, I would like to thank Prof for his presentation and insight. My question is related to farmer-led monitoring. How can we ensure accuracy when monitoring or data collection is led by farmers? Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for that question. Yeah, when
Assalamu alaikum Sheikh. Mwebale sebo. Mjebale. Alhamdulillah.
Kabuya, are you with us? Are you asking a question? No, okay, Prof, proceed.
So the main worry is the integrity of the data when we leave it in the hands of the farmers, isn't it? Right, you know
Exactly.
sorry? When you see value in what you are doing, usually you try by all means to do the correct thing. That is the first point. So how do you make the farmers see value in what they do? In the fact that the data that they are collecting is critical to the production system that they have. So once you start doing your work with the farmers and then you identify some gaps on the knowledge systems of the farmers, that they don't know A, B, C. That is where capacity building comes in. So you discuss with them, you identify the weak points, then you train them, and then you monitor them, and then you let them actually collect. And once they start using that data and understand the usefulness of it, then you are okay, because that is what can make the farmers then give you data that is of quality. Of course, you were talking about the community. Now they are working in teams because you have people with different qualities in the community. In the communities, usually it doesn't mean that everybody doesn't know how to maybe to read, to write, but there are different strengths amongst the members. When you sit down with them and then discuss who is going to be doing what, they know their strengths, they can actually assign certain activities to each other. So I think that is how best you can deal with the integrity of data when you are dealing with the farmers. I hope you are answered. I don't know, Alice, if you are around, if there's something that you may want to add.
No, I think it's fine. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, I think, Prof, there are more hands up. I see John. John, please go ahead. Then after you, then Ronald can follow. Yes, John Mark, you are still muted.
No, sorry, my network. My question was on Professor. How can the success of the policy be measured and reported, especially in the monitoring aspect?
You said how can
Okay, how can the success of the policy be measured and reported?
the success of the policy and
I
communicating?
missed that.
Thanks. You see, when you talk about measuring the success of the policy, it takes us back to the presentation that was made by Alice. When you have a policy, you want to have a guide that should help you to reach a certain target. In this case, in our climate smart agriculture, the target is to have production which is enough for our people, but without causing damage to the environment. We also want to have this production in a way that it is resilient to the conditions or to the environment, to climate change. So if you design a policy in a situation where you first of all, you do what is called the benchmarking, this is what has been happening. And then in the end, say after the 2-3 years, when you say the policy was developed and it has been implemented, now it is in play being enforced. Then you check again on the activities and if the desirable outcomes have been increased. Then you can then say, well, it appears that the policy implementation has been successful. But the way in which it has been successful can also be measured by you, because you have to define that when we say from this level to that level, it means low kind of success, and from that level to that level, medium, and then high. That kind of a definition comes from you and your stakeholders before the policy has been implemented. So the communication processes then involves a lot of things. When we have these stakeholder platforms, those issues can be discussed. It can be a platform for communication. The documentation process can also be a platform for communication. I don't know if you are answered.
It's fine, it's fine. I've picked something.
I may add some things.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Can you hear me? Thank you so much, Prof, for your wonderful presentation. And I come now to the question of John. If you want to know how to measure the success of a policy, as soon as a policy is implemented, after some years, maybe 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, one can conduct an impact evaluation studies research. And for doing that, there are a lot of methods for that. We can do an ex-post assessment. We can use an experimental method, or we can also use quasi-experimental methods. But the main methodology is to compare your target group who receive the policy with a comparable group who does not receive the policy, but which has, this group is similar to your target group based on some observable variable. So when you compare the outcome between the two groups, and you see that there is a gap, a positive gap, so we can see that the policy has a successful, and we can conclude that we measure it, is successful. And when we know that, we see an opposite, that it was not successful, so we make some adjustment. We see what works, what does not work, and we adjust it, and so on. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Alice. Right, let me check if there are some more questions in the chat. How can we integrate an open science approach in our policies or design and make it sustainable, not just ending with a project? Yeah, how can we integrate? This is a question that has been posed by Salamato, and is asking, how can we integrate an open science approach in our policies or design and make it sustainable, not just ending with the project? I don't know if this is the. Do you also see some other questions there on the chat, because I don't want to miss some of them. Alice, do you want to go first on this one?
I want to be honest, I don't get this question. I'm still thinking about it.
Okay. So what I think is that he is worry or a worry. Let me see. There are some more things that are coming, so I lost the question. He is talking about a open science and how we can use it. So in open science, it's actually, the way I understand it, some kind of a movement that aims to make scientific research more transparent and to make it even accessible and collaborative. So that is what I see as open science. And from my understanding, it is also something that involves sharing of research methods, data findings openly with others. So in this case, the most interesting thing that it is open. So in the openness of it, it means we are talking about the transparency, which is something that is really very good. But let me see the question here. How can we integrate open science approach in our policies? You see, the way that we've been discussing from the start is that the moment you bring key stakeholders together, then the opportunity of using this open science approach becomes even better, because you would have created a platform for discussion and the exchange of ideas and discussion that can actually lead to some compromises here and there. Those compromises not in the negative sense, but in a way that we have to do the same thing. I mean, the thing that we have agreed upon as one. So your question, which says open science approach, how we can use it in our policies, it's something that is already been integrated through creating these platforms, and then the inclusivity issue addresses this way of approach of really taking this open science into play. Then you also talked about how we can make it sustainable, not just ending with a project. The sustainability. Remember, when you work together with stakeholders, but putting farmers or the targeted people or stakeholder at the center, it means they would have assumed the responsibility. So that is one of the things, of the ways that you can use to actually help farmers or the affected adopt the project and then adopt the policies. Because for the project to continue functioning, then the effect of the policies should be upheld. So during the monitoring and evaluation process, because monitoring and evaluation process is not something that you can only do during the project implementation, and so you can stop it at the end. No, no, no. But it is something that you continuously do. So it is a continuous process where you have to continuously be involved in the processes. Then you can make it sustainable. I don't know if that is what you were expecting.
I think it's fine, because when we talk about open science, that make that whenever you implement a project, that means that the story, the data, everything should be shared with the community, with the researcher, so that anyone who is interested in any aspect or any particular information about this project should be able to access to information. So it is a good thing to incorporate open access to policy formulation, so that at the end of the project, if anyone wants to continue to take the outcome or to take any achievement of this policy or this project to implement in other area and so on, that can continue and so on. Thank you.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much for the addition. Okay, are there any other questions? Let me just check.
Yes, Prof. Crispin, I think maybe let's first proceed and finish up the other section. Then we can pick up, we can pick more comments after.
Okay, let me move on. Let me next slides. Oh, okay. So we are going to be looking at the monitoring and evaluation. You have established, or you understand now how you can come up with your policies, who is involved, what are the guides, how do you define the context, etc. Then to ensure that there is continuity and sustainability in the implementation of these policies, there is something that is important that you should be seen to be doing, which is monitoring and evaluation. And for us to do that, we should develop the framework for the monitoring and evaluation. And that framework, again, it is not something that is cast in stone. That's when you have one type of a framework that is working in Malawi, then that same type of framework should be seen to be working in South Africa. But you will see that there are some aspects which are common, or some aspects are even more important in one area than the other area. So in this case here, we are going, of course, to look at, of course, first of all, I will give the objectives, the learning outcomes, monitoring and evaluation framework, and then policy gaps, policy coherence, adaptation, adaptive management, accountability, and transparency. Those are some of the things that are going to be covered within this presentation. Of course, tomorrow I will talk about also the policy briefs somehow. Right, so when you are talking about the learning objectives in this case, what we want is to assess policy effectiveness. Yeah, a question that was asked previously is partially also going to be addressed in this sense, because the effectiveness of a policy, it can be observed in the changes that you can see after the implementation of the policy. So specifically, we are going to what we want to see is, or what we want to do is to equip learners with the competencies and effective mechanisms for policy analysis, monitoring, evaluation, and policy review. We also want to explain, for you participants to be able to explain theories in policy analysis and distinguish between policy analysis and models. This is what you will see actually in this module. And some of the things may not be covered, of course, because I'll just look at the key things that can help you into understanding how you can go about this monitoring and evaluation and creation, and how you can create actually this framework. There's guide analysis of policy documents also related to CSA and CIS. So you should be able to have this analytical eye when you are dealing with policies, to now be able to say, oh, this policy which was developed here appears to be having these weaknesses. This policy, it is true in this sense, but if you can do or add this, maybe it can even become more effective. When you are able to be doing that, then it means you have actually learned something. Right, so let me move on. Not forgetting our learning outcomes previously. What we want to see is that the learners should be able to communicate the key concepts, tools, and stages related to evaluation and policy review process, and also for the learners to be able to explain conceptual frameworks, principles, and guidelines necessary for the effective policy analysis. Right. So I will look mainly at two important things today: the assessments for policy and policy design. When you want to do the assessment of the policy, there are three key things that you should take into consideration. You need data collection. And that data collection is not only collecting data by just one method. There are several methods depending on the context and depending on the situation that you are in. Sometimes in certain situations, you will see savings being the most appropriate ways of collecting data. In others, you can see interviews as being the most appropriate. But in some cases, you can also see that a combination of various other methods, these are just two that I've mentioned. But there are several others, like you can think of focus group discussions, you can think of key informants and so on and so forth. Sometimes you see that the combination can actually work well to give you various dimensions of data that you want to use in the assessing or in assessing the effectiveness of a certain policies. Then there is data analysis, analytical techniques. Some of course, the most common one, we need this statistical analysis. There is also what they call thematic analysis. There are several other ways in which you can actually analyze your data to see from what we have collected, how can you make sense out of the data? That is the data analysis. How can you make sense out of all this data which I have collected? That is the analytical part. Then the third one is stakeholder engagement and participation. Because this data, if you don't have those stakeholders, then where are you going to get it from? There is need for you to be interacting with your stakeholders in the data collection, because they are giving you the information, in the analysis because they have to confirm or deny a certain outputs that you are coming out with. And then in the end, because you have to communicate with them the meaning of the data, the analysis that you would have carried out. So let us look at these policies and programs. Look at this diagram on the left, assessments for policy and project design. When you are doing this process, you look at conceptualization. You are on your own or in your as a team trying to see the processes, what is needed. This is about climate smart agriculture. You have to go into the preparatory phase, the appraisal and approval, implementation, then you come to evaluation here, which is the area where we are now mainly at. And then you look at the long-term evaluation. So you can see there's the short-term and then there's the long-term. So the evaluation process in this case is divided into two, and it is something that is being given actually a lot of importance. When you look at this diagram, here they are saying that the blue background, which are these boxes, are showing the monitoring and the evaluation. There's something what that I want to show you here. Then when you look at the green background, you see the assessments of policy and project design, right? So for the monitoring and the evaluation, you can actually see that it is coming at various stages. At the stages of preparation, appraisal, at the stages where you have the implementation, you have some guides and some guided indices that help you to understand your policy cycle. You will see the project cycle. You have the project cycle, which needs implementation, evaluation, and appraisal. But there are some monitoring and evaluation. And this monitoring and evaluation, if you don't go further into long-term evaluation, then you fall into the trap that one of you asked the question on, then how can you make it not only end with the project, which means at the end of the project, you need to put into place what is called the long-term evaluation system. Then this is what can ensure support you that the processes are continuing, right? So developing a flow chart, now you really need to develop this flow chart of a monitoring and evaluation framework. Because it's a framework, it is some elements, it is some processes that are involved. So there are some steps in some stages which are crucial, which you have to take into place. The first step is planning. So when you say planning, in this case, what you want to look at is first, for you in the planning process, we define the objectives, isn't it? What are our objectives for the M&E? You identify which indicators are we going to be looking at and what are the targets. That is the planning process. How are we going to develop the data collection plan? So this okay, so on the data development, sorry, on the planning processes, you can actually see that there are these key things that you have really to take into consideration. So from the planning process, and remember, we are always saying this planning process should involve also the key stakeholders so that they are with you from the start. Then we go on to the data collection. That is the second step. So in the data collection, you have to think of the methods, which are the methods that are going to be used, the best methods that we are going to apply. And these methods can actually depend on the context of your situation. So in data collection, you may use some surveys, you may do some questionnaires, you can do some interviews, you can do some focus group discussions. Some people are happy with just observations and field visits. And some, they just review, they call it secondary data analysis. So you can see that there are various tools that you can use data collection. Then you move on to the data analysis. On the data analysis, we have what we call quantitative data analysis. When you collect data, which is of quantitative nature, then it would require some statistics to be done so that maybe you come up with some trends that can actually help you to see the picture on what is happening. Then you can also look at the qualitative data analysis. If you have the qualitative one, then maybe you want to look at the themes and the patterns. And you can also want maybe to do the data visualization, which could be in the form of charts in the graphs. So that is what is involved here in the data analysis. Before I move to step 4, 5, and 6, you can actually see that when you are working, when you are involved in training, it is always good to give some examples on where things are happening. In this diagram on the left-hand side, that figure, it can actually show you that when you start doing things, you are talking about your resources. But then there are processes that are involved, and then those processes will give you the results. But if you want to use your resources to get the results, there is a lot of planning that goes into it. And then you are required to do the implementation process. Right? And as you plan and then you implement the activities which are happening, so these results are determined by the way in which you are going to apply your resources, the way in which you and your stakeholders are going to behave, and which targets that you have set. Right. So let me come back to step number 4, which is reporting. After your data analysis, which means you looked at how to make sense with your data. Now you want to do the reporting. On the reporting part, you need to do some regular progress reports. You don't just have to start from the end. You have to do it from the beginning. So the regular reports can actually keep on updating your stakeholders. The annual review reports are key. The final evaluation reports is also important. Whenever you are doing the monitoring and the evaluation process, the data that you are going to be collecting has to be analyzed, and you have to have the reports. And then when you have the reports, that is when you need to give the feedback and then discuss the learning points. Right? So that you see, in some certain circumstances, we have what are called the stakeholder platforms. At the stakeholder platforms, you have people who would have been assigned on certain things to do, some certain work to do, some certain activities to take. Then they would come back and do the reporting, and others would comment, and then they would discuss. Then in the discussion, you are going to see some other issues emerging, which are also going to be assigned to some individuals or organizations to go and try and implement in a way of trying to help the situation out. So in the feedback and learning, we should have this stakeholder feedback and engagement, and lessons learned and the best practices are actually identified, so as to make some recommendations for policy adjustments. So this is how this flowchart goes. In the end, now after all this is done, you come to the process of decision making. So in decision making, you are expected to look at how policymakers use the M&E findings to inform those decisions. So how, from this, what we have found, then the policymakers, we are now thinking, how are they going to use these M&E findings to inform their decisions? Because in the end, if this information is not communicated to the policymakers now, those ones who then say in parliament that we have passed this policy as a guide to do A, B, C, D. If we just end it with research and what we are doing in the field, then it doesn't work. So also in the decision-making process, you see there is what is called the policy adjustments and revisions. because these are actually inspired by the work that you've been doing, what has been coming from the various sources of assessments. And also you look at the improved policy implementation and outcomes. So that is the stage where the decision-making process is important. So I can say for today, I managed to give you the framework for how you develop that framework for M&E, the assessments for the policy and the policy design. And also, so tomorrow, what I'll do is that I just need 30 minutes, then I'll look at the policy briefs. And then, because after developing some policies, we want to see how we can move those policies forward. So the 30 minutes, I think I'll do that, and then my colleague will come with the fourth chapter. Right, thank you very much. I think we can discuss. Hello, I don't know who is facilitating now. It seems...
Is Dr. Alice on?
I think
Sure.
so.
Thank
No,
you. I'm online. We are having our question and answer session, right?
Yes.
Okay. So anyone want to ask question may raise their hand or may also write down the question in the chat. I have a list of questions in the chat so far. I'm trying to answer. But anyone ready to ask question can unmute the micro and speak, please. Thanks.
Okay, people feel free to ask. There's a hand from Jirma. Jirma, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for your nice presentation. I would like to ask one question regarding this monitoring and evaluation framework. Is it similar to the theory of change? Because some of the components that I see here are similar to that. And how do we discriminate between that and monitoring and evaluation framework? Are they the same? Maybe I have a little know-how on this. Thank you for giving me the chance to ask.
Okay. Thank you very much. So you want to know whether the monitoring and evaluation and theory of change are related. These ones are really not, I can't say that they are the same. Of course, you can see some aspects which kind of appear similar. Because when you are looking at monitoring and evaluation, you are looking at some kind of a systematic process that can be used to collect and analyze, and then also use the data to track progress. You want to look at this systematic process that can assess performance and inform decision making. But if you can look at it closely, again, you see that it focuses on the measuring of outcomes and identifying areas of improvement and ensuring accountability. But when you look at the theory of change, then the theory of change will give you, it is actually a conceptual framework that outlines the underlying assumptions in the causal links and expected outcomes of a program and a program and intervention. So you can actually see that the two are really not saying the same things. The theory of change tries to describe how and why particular change is expected to occur. You see, it's on the how. That is where you get the key differences. The key differences. It is actually on the purpose. So whereby how can I, if they add some, because when you look at the purpose for the M&E, for example, the M&E focuses on the tracking of progress and the evaluating of effectiveness. And when you look at the theory of change, it outlines the underlying logic and assumptions of a program. So you can see that the two are at variance. Maybe the other thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the other thing that could be important, it is also the time where you see it happen. When you talk of the theory of change, you see it being typically actually being developed during the program design, while your M&E occurs throughout the program. So those are some of the differences. I don't know if there is somebody who would want to add something. Okay.
Yes, Ronald?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Professor, for the questions in the chat. However, I can probably mention them here. Over time, we have had CSA assessment tools being criticized for being generic. Through this platform, I would like to know how best can we contextualize these assessment tools, because in the end, the data and the information that has come out of assessments or surveys or evaluations has also been criticized for being generic and reporting mostly in a conventional way. And yet, for example, some of the climate smart agriculture practices have a lot of other factors that influence them. The information, like I've said, that comes out of these assessments, the exact, the specific impact of these climate smart agriculture practices. So how best can we improve on these or in these areas so that we can communicate exactly what farmers are interested in? Then lastly, the reporting mechanisms or the reporting of the information from evaluations has been also criticized for being for not communicating the exactness of the, for example, the impact of a given practice, let's say irrigation. And in one or the other, farmers have struggled to differentiate between how best a drip irrigation system is a climate smart agriculture practice vis-a-vis a conventional kind of intervention. So how best again can we improve on this to make sure that how we communicate data to the last mile users makes sense to them and promotes a sustainable adoption of these practices?
Yeah, it's quite.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, on the criticisms that we normally get on the tools that we use in data analysis, in the analysis of systems for CSA, I think taking it from the presentation that we've been giving, or what this module, how this module is designed, we talk about involvement of farmers, extension agents, local stakeholders, basically engagement of stakeholders. The reason is actually to try and adapt the CSA tools according to the context. So those CSA tools are actually supposed to be modified to fit the local conditions, such as climate, soil, the type of stakeholders that we have. But most importantly, when you design them, there's need for you to do the test and validation. That is by carrying out a pilot kind of a test on the CSA tools that maybe you may have identified as appropriate. You do that with the local farmers, with your stakeholders, iterating and refining them. So that is how you can actually make. So it means in the reporting process, for example, you're writing a paper, a publication, it should come out the way you chose the tools and the way you tried to to adapt those tools according to the local conditions that are there, the iteration processes that you took that took place. So you would find that in some publications, the people or scientists don't bother to report on that part. So in the end, it would just appear that you just took one tool and then you applied it. The same way that you apply it in Rwanda is the same way that you apply it in Guinea. So yet the contexts are actually different. The other way is also to try and provide training and support for farmers, extensionists and others as a way of trying to make them understand some of these tools. Because it doesn't make sense for you to actually go into a system with a tool and then you are trying to collect data which they don't understand the questions or what you want to get from there. Because there are some underlining things that the farmer in his own mind or in his own way is also thinking, who is this guy? What does he need this data for? Can I give him the correct information? So in the end, when you come up with your output, that output, if you don't describe correctly the processes that took place, people will start doubting. So I think if you can do this refining iterations and so on, and then putting it into context, it can actually help us in trying to make these tools understood. I don't know if there's something that I left. The last parts of the question where you're talking about irrigation, I think I missed some parts.
Prof, there are some questions in the chat. I'm trying to give some answers. Maybe you read some of them and add
Okay.
additional comment, please. Thank you.
Oh, you are answering them on the chat. Okay. So
Some about the irrigation, I was just trying to.
yes, you can go ahead. You can go ahead, say.
Jirma, you still have something to say?
Yes, if I'm given a chance, yes.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you again, Prof, for your nice presentation. I always have issues discriminating between policy and practices. And usually, in the same way we do it here, we list all these and then converting and getting out from this, the policies, is really a challenge. And how do you really discriminate between this? Should we start from, by defining the policy first? And then this is the policy and how this policy is being implemented. And then once we know the implementation, and then we take it back again, how those policies are really being implemented or not. How do you really discriminate them? Do we have any mechanism to isolate between, like this CSA, we have several practices of CSA, we do it as a practice. But how does that translate into the policy, and which policies are being addressed and to what extent? How do you really do it? And thank you very much. Yeah, back to you.
Yeah, that is a very interesting question. Policy and practice, because you are talking about two things that are really related, but they are distinct in their own sense. If we look at policy, for example, you look at policy as a guide principle or a set of principles that outline the organization, it's the organization's intentions and goals, isn't it? And a policy provides a framework for decision making and resource allocation. So when you look at practice, you are looking at the actual implementation or application of policy. So you are looking at the principles, you are looking at the procedures, and you are looking at the way things are done in reality, which may actually or may not align with the policy. You see? So for the key differences that I can pick from this is that when you look at the two, policy and practice, you are looking at two different things in the sense of intent and implementation. One is a statement of intent, and the other one is actually implementation. That is, policy outlines intentions, while practice involves in actual implementations, right? I don't know if it is making sense, but also you can also take it in the sense of theory and reality. So policy provides you with the theoretical framework, while the practice now reflects the real world application. And you can also look at it in the form of guidance and action. That is, policy guides you in the decision-making process, while the practice is actually like how you are taking action. So I think those are the differences that I can think of, that they are really used together, but they mean different things. Yeah. I don't know if there's somebody who would want to add something, because I know there are some fundis here who can also I see there was also some question, they've missed it.
There's Lucy.
Okay.
Lucy, please unmute and ask your question or comment.
Okay, thanks for the nice presentation. I was wondering whether the monitoring and evaluation framework varies from one program to another, or do we have a standard framework for the MNE? And the second question, do you have various policies and frameworks governing the monitoring and evaluation framework? Thank you.
Okay. Your first question is, you want to know whether there is a standard M&A framework. If I got you right, I think this is what I got. That's is there really a standard, what we may call a standard M&E framework? You know, during the presentation, we talked about several things. We talked about stakeholders, but we all know that stakeholders are not the same. The stakeholders in a certain problem situation in Zimbabwe, let us just consider maybe three: the farmer, the government official, maybe in the NGO office. If you take those ones to look at the problem of livestock production in Zimbabwe, yeah, you may see, maybe you may discover that the kind of ideas that they are going to come up with as solutions differs from the same similar kind of stakeholders, the government official, the NGO officer, and so on, in, say, Burkina Faso, because the situations are different. So because of different contexts, we can't say there is a single universally accepted monitoring and evaluation framework. But you can actually see that there are several widely used frameworks and approaches which exist. We have things like the logical framework approach. I think you know this, the results-based monitoring, the theory of change. These things can be there with the guide, but the way in which one aspect is valued in one area could be different from the way it is valued in another area. I guess I answered your question. So actually, what I can say is that your choice of an M&E framework depends on the specific context, your program goals, your stakeholder needs, so that when you actually design your M&E, that should ensure effective monitoring, evaluation, and learning of that system within that context. Right. You asked the second question. I think I missed that one. Anyway, there was also someone on the chat who wrote something like, what is the current African adaptation resilient measures in agriculture? In reference to climate change, etc. Right, you can, in Africa, I think you can see from the several examples that we gave in this module on adaptation, there are various ways of adaptation and resilience measures that are being used to measure the impacts of climate change on agriculture. In some of them, some of these measures which are being used, you can actually see that there is climate smart agriculture implementation, where some countries are actually promoting sustainable agriculture, improve crop animal productivity, and enhance resilience. You see this in most reports in most publications. And also conservation agriculture, which is being implemented in Zimbabwe, it is really quite common these days. You are seeing most farmers are now adopting this conservation agriculture because they've seen the benefits of conservation practices. Of course, you'd find that the aspects of unavailability of appropriate tools to use with conservation agriculture may be slowing the implementation process. Some talk about adaptation measures, smallholder farmers doing various adaptation measures such as crop diversification. You see farmers actually doing some soil conservation processes the use of irrigation management, climate information services now coming into play. So these things are happening in most areas in Africa. So Africa is actually doing a lot in trying to embrace these aspects of climate smart agriculture. Right.
Thank you very much for the answer. Well understood. Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay, Prof. Ngwako and Dr. Alice, maybe we can leave it there for today.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and thank you to you, the facilitators and the participants for the attendance and the active engagement. I think the discussion has really been interactive. So let's come again tomorrow for the final day of the training.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming, and greetings from the Reform Secretariat and the Reform Network.
I'll see you tomorrow then.
See you tomorrow. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you very
Anyone
much.
who has not registered, please register.
Thank you very much, everyone.
All right. Okay.
Okay, thank you.